As the kids like to say today, it's been a minute. I think the last time I shot a video was July or August of 2021. It is currently January 2nd, 2022. So, back in April of 2021, I started actually shooting part 9 of the C70 restoration series. So you can see there's a bunch of C70 parts here, tires, rims and stuff like that. And what we're doing in that video is doing the wheels. I got the wheels apart, but the spokes are in really bad shape. So if I bring you in, well, not horrible, but it's not something I want to put back on the bike. So you can see they're rather rusty. So these need to be replated. So I recently ordered a bunch of nickel, actual pure nickel. I'm going to be making a nickel plating solution out of that and then doing some electroplating, so you'll see that in that video. But while we wait for that stuff to show up, I have an idea with regard to something I'm going to want, potentially need, when we put these wheels back together. So, to the bench, let me show you what I'm talking about. So what I want to do is I want to build a motorcycle trimming stand similar to this style here. So these are about $100 on Amazon, the cheap versions. You can get them up to $300 or $400 if you so want to spend that kind of money. Me, personally, I'm too cheap and I want to build one out of the stuff I have laying around. So I took a quick trip over to my, I guess, scrap pile of steel. So I've got this rod that I want to use. So the way these are usually made up is you have 2 uprights. On the top of each upright, you have bearings mounted on either side. Your rod then sits on top of those bearings so it can spin freely. And then you have cones on either side with set screws that you can bring in, tighten down, and hold your wheel in place. That all then is mounted on like a flat base. And I'm not too concerned with the flat base part. I'm not going to make something with like adjustable feet or anything, because this is something I'm probably just going to clamp using like vice grips or C-clamps onto the end of my motorcycle lift. That way I have an easy spot to adjust up and down to work on this stuff. So here's a quick look once again up close on something that you can buy, and I'm going to try to build it. So here we go. So the first thing I need to do is I need to cut this death end point off this piece of rod. So I'll zing that off quick, and we'll bring this rod over to the lathe and ensure everything's good and true and cleaned up. Now that we've got the nasty pointy bit off the end, relatively decent cut, no Allen Millyard, but you know, it works out. Let's take this over to the lathe, get it center punched on both ends, or center drilled on both ends, so I can use a live center with it, and get it cleaned up. So to this point, I've got my piece of steel cleaned up, so I just cleaned it up in a wire wheel. Hopefully this is looking alright. I'm going to double check this, make sure it's not shit. Yeah, you guys can see what I'm doing. You can't see my face, but who needs to? So what I'm going to do, I just put my 3-jaw back on. I'm going to chuck this up. We'll center drill each end. Well, first thing I'll do is I'll face it off, center drill. Same thing, flip it around, face it off, center drill. Then I've got a means of putting that in a live center and keeping this nice and straight and sort of a minimal, hopefully, flex when I take this down to size. So I'll leave the camera running. This will be a quick fast forward through, and then so you guys can see what I'm doing. Post-Production Frank here. Just wanted to chime in and say if you're enjoying my video, I'd appreciate if you'd click that like button. If you like my content, you want to see more of it, feel free to click the subscribe button as well as the little notification bell there. For smaller channels like mine, those things really help us out with the algorithm, so if you could do that, I'd greatly appreciate it. So I've got things set up now so I can go ahead and just stress this off. I'm going to let the lathe do the lifting for me. So I'm going to set it up such that the carriage I can engage and it'll clip along on its own. Right here. And see how it goes. So I'll come in and touch off manually first, then I'll go ahead and engage and let this thing do the work for me. So here we go. So let's talk about the cones we want to make for this true inkstand. Looking at the ID of the bearings in the hubs of the C70, I think these are 17 millimeter. Yep, there you go, focus that. The aluminum that I have is 1 inch or 25 millimeter. Not autofocus, so you can see it, 25 millimeter. So I want to go, I'll take a millimeter off the OD of this to make it 24. Let me turn autofocus back on here. So what I'll do is I'll take a millimeter off, as you can see, this is 25. Hello. So I'll take a mil and a bit off that to make it 24. I'll make these cones 50 millimeters long, roughly 2 inches. And then I'll go 40 millimeters, so wherever that 50 point was, I'll try to hold that with my thumb. We'll take this into 40 mil, leaving a centimeter up top there for the flat piece. So that's flat piece right here, where we'll drill and have our set screw. And then the taper will be 40 mils long. It'll go from the 24 down to probably, I'll pick something just a little larger than the size of the diameter of the rod, which is 12 meters, so probably like 14 millimeter. So we'll take a centimeter off total for the taper on this. So I'm gonna get this chucked up, get an edge straight, bring it down to 24 millimeters, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start cutting the taper and get our first cone made. See how it goes. So at this point we should be pretty much dead on final diameter. Have a quick check here. We got 24.0, 403, 24.04. So yeah, we're there. I'll call that good. So now what I want to do is I want to set up my compound to do our taper. So if I just lift you, hopefully this is half steady. What we now want is, I'll mark off 40 millimeters, 4 centimeters of width, and then we're going to go from a 14 millimeter end of the cone over here up to 24 here, so we'll have essentially a centimeter of ID to work with when we go to true up any wheels going forward on the stand. So we're going from 14 millimeter to 24 millimeter, so we know we have 1 full centimeter to take off, and then because we'll be doing this as a triangle, we'll be doing half of it. So we've got a situation where we've got a right triangle, an angle theta. This side is 40 millimeters. And this side is going to be 5 because it's going to be half of the 1 centimeter, or 10. That would be the whole thing. Just think if it was like this and back up this way, then we'd be going from that 14 out to the 24. We just have like a gap here kind of thing, but we're not too concerned with that gap right now. So if we look at this, solving this is going to be sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse, or opposite over adjacent, sorry. So katoa. Oh, I got to use tangent here. So katoa. That is, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tan is opposite over adjacent. So we got tan theta equals opposite over adjacent. That would be theta being the inverse tangent of 1 over 8, which works out to be. So if we look at, let me get this zoomed in here. Come on, focus. The inverse tangent of 1 over 8 is 0.12 something radians, or it is 7.125 degrees. So now we know that this angle here is 7.125 degrees. So we're going to go with 7 degrees, just because there's no way you're getting 0.125 to an eighth of a degree out of the accuracy or the compound on this lathe. So I went ahead and I set my compound here at 7 degrees. Bring you guys over closer. Let's see. 7 degrees. So now I'm ready to go ahead and take my taper cuts on the component. So I'm going to keep you guys around for the first couple passes. You'll see as I start taking more and more off. And then I'll bring you guys back once I'm complete. I think you guys get the idea by this point. I've got another little tiny bit to take off. And then once I'm done getting that off, it'll be time to actually part this off using my parting tool. So I'll be putting this in, parting it off. And then I'll be ready to put this in the vise, drill a hole, tap it for a set screw, and we'll be good to test it out on the shaft. And then I have to make another one. Either way, I'll bring you guys back when I get this parted off. I'm ready to drill a hole in it. So here's the situation now. We've got the rod we did earlier. We've now got a cone. So essentially, cone slides onto the rod, and then motorcycle wheel goes on, cone goes into bearings like so, and now this whole thing rotates because this will be set on bearings right here. And we've got a way to mount the wheel on a truing stand slash balancing stand. So I'm going to go ahead and machine up the other one of these, this cone. Once we have our second cone done, I'll be ready to drill and tap the holes for the set screws that'll lock the cones on to the rods. So I'll be back once I have a second one of these. See you guys in 15 minutes or so. For you guys, a few seconds. So I've got one of my cones cinched up in the vise here. My drill ready, so I got my spot here. This is a 13/64 drill bit. And now we should be able to take our metric 6x1 set screw and thread it down into this hole. Here we go. And now this will act as the means of keeping the cone and the shaft together as one. So I'm going to go ahead now and do the other one, and I'll bring you guys back when we got this on the shaft. So here's the current situation. Axle's done, cones are done, also with the set screw holes tapped and drilled. So what happens is, slide cone off one side, set your set screw on the other side. Wheel gets put on, so this goes through where the axle usually goes in the wheel. This goes up against the inner diameter of the wheel bearing on one side. You bring in your other cone, same thing, that goes then in against the other side. You tighten this set screw. Now your wheel, your cones, and your axle are all one assembly. So then when this is laid on top of the frame that we're going to be building, these bearings will then sit under either side of the axle, like so. And then when you spin your wheel, it'll spin freely and you'll be able to balance or true up the spokes or true up the rim by, adjusting your spokes, etc. So at this point, I think I still may have one small piece of machining work to do, and that will be to create, I guess, the nuts or the screws or however I want to fix these to the top part of the frame. My original intent here was to build my uprights or my frame out of 1x2 steel. And I only had a few scrap pieces, so what I was going to do was I was going to weld those together and make something big enough to do that, but I don't have enough of it. So what I do have, and what I did find, is a couple pieces of 2" by 3" 1/8" wall steel. So what we'll do, and this is totally overkill, but it'll still work, these pieces get cut off at 20 inches tall, so I want a 20" height frame. We'll then tap and drill so we can bolt our bearings on so that they just stick just over the surface of it, kind of like so. That way our rod can rest between those two bearings and rotate freely. And we'll use a small piece of the 1x2 as the cross member, and this will all get welded up. Once that's done, then this essentially just gets C-clamped onto the end of my motorcycle lift, and we can use it right off the end of the lift as a trim stand. So, first thing we got to do is cut these two pieces off. Now that we've got these legs cut to length, what we need to do next is drill and tap the holes where we're going to attach our bearings to. Now, one thing to note is, and I'll come in close for a sec just to show you this. Autofocus on. Because this would be sloppy inside the inner diameter of this bearing, I'm going to make some brass bushings to fit inside these. That'll fit tight on the ID of these and fit tight on the OD of these bolts. So I'm going to see if I can do this in a minute. We've got a bearing, looks like this. We got a bearing ID like this. These bearings have an ID of 11 millimeters. So that means we're going to want this bushing, when it's machined down, to fit 11 millimeters. So we've got this part of the bushing that goes through the bearing, which is 11 millimeters. We've got a width here of 8 millimeters, so this width here we're going to want to be 8 millimeters. Then I'm going to make a flange. It's going to be essentially like a washer to keep this off of the steel so it can spin freely. 1 millimeter wide. Give us 1 millimeter wide there. So this here is 1 millimeter. And then this here will be, this from here to here is 13.5 millimeters. I just measured that. And finally, we want a hole for the bolt to go through so we can screw that on. These bolts are 7.8 millimeters. So here's that hole there. This here is 7.8. And that's essentially 5/16. I went ahead and checked that with my calipers. So this is the part we're going to make right now. So order of operations to make this part is going to be take this round stock, machine it down to a total OD of 13.5 for a few centimeters, then drill a hole through it. That's 5/16. That'll give us clearance for our bolt. Then we'll come in 8 millimeters, so this is the 8 mil part here, down at 11, and leave the outside one. Then we can part it off, and we'll have a bushing that we can test. So, to get this more clear for my brain and your brain, let's go to the lathe and start machining. So we're right on our 13.5 there. Maybe you can see that. Maybe I'll try to get that without the light. There you go, 13.5. So that matches the size of the band for the inner bearing race. So now I'm going to drill this out with the 5/16 drill bit, which should be 7.8 millimeters-ish. And then we'll have a spot for our bolts to go through. So now we got this situation. I've got one bushing made. Let's see if I can hold that up for you so you can focus there. There you go. So there's the little bushing. See like the flange stuff on it. So if we take our bearing, see that the bushing goes into the bearing like so. See, there's a nice snug fit in there. Our bolt would then go through this side like so, holding on against the inside race. Now you see it's not super tight because I don't have the exact drill bit size. Come on, focus, but that'll be more than good enough once you put that in to have a nice bearing set up. So in looking at the shaft and where it was rotating on the bearings, there's like probably 0.5 millimeter of clearance between the shaft and the top of the leg. So what I'm doing now is I already did one. Just going to do the other. So I'm using a round file to first come down the middle of that spot. Get started here. Go down so far, and then I'm going to flatten off the ridges with the flat file. So this is a device you can see. I've got my little dip made there. And it gives us a bit more clearance for that rod when it's on the rotating. So now, time to cut a couple more pieces of this 2x3 so we can get this all welded up. So the original idea here was to have a piece fixed within the bottom of the legs here that would then set the width of this truing / balancing stand, which would then be clamped onto the end of the bench. Couple issues I see with that. One, fixed width, no longer can adjust, open, close, whatever, which, you know, not entirely horrible, but, you know, it would be nice to have that option. The second issue I see with that is there's going to be another 2-inch piece of 2x3 steel here, and then that takes up that added room, so if I get a taller wheel, it might bring up on it. So the brainwave that I had was I can set it up such that I can cut 4 3-inch pieces of angle iron. So I've got the angle iron here. Essentially the angle iron gets welded onto the bottom of each leg like so. One piece here, one piece here, one piece here, one piece here. Then we can clamp our legs independently to the table, so then we can have a fixed width, or we can fix it to any width that we want that's within the width of that axle, and we can then also have that extra clearance down here. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to take this over to the saw, cut off 4 pieces, we'll get it all welded up, then we'll clamp it on the bench and have a look at it. Yay! So here we go, a mostly final product. Welds are dog shit because I had to use my argon can from my TIG welder. Didn't have any carbon dioxide / argon. So the welds are shit, but they held. So now what we got is we got these 2 legs clamped down with C-clamps to the end of the bench here, or to the end of my motorcycle lift. We've got our axle in place, spinning nice and good. Now once we get a wheel on this, we can give that a flick, true up a wheel, balance a wheel, all that good stuff. I'm not going to be doing that in this video because that's going to happen in my next video, which is going to be part 9 of the C70 series. It's an ongoing restoration of the 1981 Honda C70 scooter that I'm working on. I'm currently looking at the wheels behind the camera. They're disassembled, so we've got some spokes to clean up, re-nickel plate them. I've got some nickel on the way. Once that's all done, we reassemble the wheels and it'll be going on this baby to get balanced as well as trued up. So I want to thank you guys for coming along the journey with me, and I'll see you in the next one.